This performance is a demonstration of some of the most famous Shaolin techniques, including weapons, fist forms, and Qigong. The Shaolin warriors train under Matthew Amett, the head coach of the Shaolin Temple in Cheshire. Matthew's the 34th generation Shaolin warrior and is the first and only non-Chinese Shaolin discipline to tour with the Shaolin Temple Wheel of Life show. What you're about to see is very dangerous, so please show as much support as possible. And when you see something that you think is amazing, like that, make sure you make as much noise as you can, stamp your feet, scream, shout, and go crazy for the Shaolin Warriors!
Well, when you talk about Shaolin and coming from London, you think that, well, is it really Shaolin? And there's a story here, spending 4 years training in China. Now that's no mean effort, that one. It's going to take a lot of courage. How did you muster up the courage to follow that pathway?
Well, in a short nutshell, although I'm very young, it's a long story. I was into martial arts, as a lot of kids are, following Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee. And when I was 11, I saw a show called The Wheel of Life, which is kind of the biggest show out of Shaolin Temple. It was massive, it was at that time, it was the first time they had come to England, so it was in all the newspapers, The Guardian, all these kind of newspapers that my parents were reading, and they were seeing it and saying that, we're going to book tickets. And at that time, tickets to see a show like that was like £60. It was in central London. So I went along, and what I saw there was just unbelievable compared to what I thought martial arts was. For example, obviously Bruce Lee is a legend, and he's very famous in the Western world, and he was doing push-ups on, his thumb and his finger. And I saw a guy do a handstand on one finger of each hand. For me, this was just a whole different way of martial arts, compared to what I knew. So from then on, it was my dream to go to China. I left school after year 11, which is around the age of 16, and shortly after that summer, I actually moved out to China. My parents weren't too fond on it at first. My mom is now a professor, and she's kind of very high up in the academic world. And my dad came from quite a poor background, and he was very influenced for me to go to school by his kind of upbringing, because he didn't have those opportunities. He was working in factories, in Turkish factories across London when he was a little boy at 15, driving cars illegally and doing work for pennies, really. So he was really eager for me to stay in school, but I pushed, and it was a bit of a long story. I'm actually going to tell it because it's quite funny. I had a teacher who I was being told was one of the best and was, the Shaolin monk, and as all of these guys say they are. And supposedly he was meant to be helping me get an invitation letter, because under 18 years old, going out to China, you can't just jump on a plane like an adult. Yeah. You have to have a real reason for going, because you're a minor. And being a Shaolin monk, surely he would have got me that letter. And we booked my flights, and 2 weeks, 1 week, 5 days, don't have this letter, and I need a visa. I need to go to the embassy and apply for a visa. So I jumped on my bike, like, this is last decision. My mum's about to cancel the flight and my dream's about to be crumbled. I jumped on my bike and I rode to the nearest Chinese restaurant. And at that time I was planning to go to China, so I had one of those little books, and start ni hao and all these basic words. And it's closed because it's daytime, so I'm banging on the door, and this Chinese guy comes down. I'm ni hao, and he comes in. I explain. He doesn't really speak English. I'm like, I kung fu, go China. And he said, okay, so you want me to? All he had to do was phone one of these schools in Shaolin and get them to fax a letter across. Now we didn't have a fax machine, so my dad, who worked at the local college, they were gonna do the fax for us. So he took the fax number and said, now. By that time it was evening in China, like late. Like 10 o'clock, he said, so everyone's sleeping. He said, but tonight, in England's time, it'll be morning in China, so I'll speak to them. So he said, but we can't do anything now, just go home. So I'm going to go home, and, don't know what's going to happen. The next morning, my dad goes to work, and 3 letters in Chinese, 3 letters in English. So we just went to the embassy, paid for, 1 hour service, got my visa, and that was...
What a chance meeting, hey?
Yeah, it was, it was a bit of luck.
Life-changing.
Yeah, life-changing, because really, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't have been able to go out to China. Because it would have obviously ruined things, and then if coming from my own teacher not being able to help me get over there, my mom wouldn't have really had the courage to send me over there, thinking that this was the guy that was organising everything, and he can't really help me get a visa. She wouldn't have had much confidence in the whole thing, but I made it over there, and it was a very bumpy journey at the start. I ended up in a school which was pretty much falling down. which is the most common thing that happens to most foreigners when you go there, you know, because if you meet the people who speak English, then you're most probably getting conned.
Yeah.
And obviously not speaking Chinese, that's the only people you can speak to, so you do get conned. That's just what happens, really. Out there, that ego very quickly died. I remember I went out there and it was winter time, and there was only, in winter, Chinese New Year, everyone goes home for the breaks. I was at a small school, relatively small, about 200 students.
So you weren't actually in the temple itself?
No,
There's not many involved
there's a few camps around. I was at a school called, it was run by Yan Zhang, who's quite a famous guy in China as well. So I was there and there wasn't many kids there, and I remember one of the first things, you know, I couldn't speak Chinese, and
it's very difficult to learn.
yeah, it was very difficult to learn, but now it's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of fluent in Chinese
But
now.
you get your own translator and coach as well now, haven't you? Your wife?
What do you mean?
Your wife. Your
Yeah.
wife. So, you don't have to translate now. You've got your own coach, teacher.
No, exactly. I mean, we've been together so long. I teach her English, actually.
Yeah.
Not that she taught me Chinese. Just being out in China was very easy to learn Chinese. But 3 months, 6 months into the trip, I was getting around, doing everything I needed to do, and then obviously by 2 years, I was pretty much fluent. The smallest of details, you know, things about inside of a camera and stuff, maybe even vocab that you don't know in English. Obviously, I'm not going to know in Chinese, but generally, I'm fluent. You can. I remember I would just taught myself in the park how to do a backflip, like with no hands. So I'm there, and there's these little orphan kids. Everyone's gone away for Chinese New Year, and there's a few six kids around, and they're very poor. You know, everyone. And this what really changed my life is seeing how these guys, you know, at points we didn't have electricity. Sometimes during winter there was no water because it was all frozen, and these kids were fine. They were making fires and making noodles, and that's stuff that as a 16-year-old thinking, yeah, you know, I come from London and had this attitude, I realized that I was very immature and I couldn't actually do anything without.
It would be a big major culture shock, you know, at that age.
Yeah, of course, you know, there was no showers. I go into schools and talk to kids, and they, you know, okay, you didn't have no water, but that means no heating, that means no showers, that means a lot of things that you take for granted.
All those comforts.
And exactly, and in the Western world, you get a lot of these kids, and they think that, you know, the phrase their life is hard, their life is ghetto, you know, and you know, my life's so hard. You have heating, you have a bed, you have a PlayStation, you have a TV, all of these things that I didn't even think about when I got out there. You know, the room was just basics, just concrete. There was no flooring, it was just concrete. You had these wooden planks for beds.
Yes.
The toilets were outside, and the toilets where I first was were 6 holes. So you'd go and you would squat and go to the loo.
Great for the low kung fu stance.
Great for the stance, exactly. Yeah. Well, see, this is something very important about what I take from the martial arts. See, is it's not, you know, oh, why did the Chinese? And that's something that I offer to my students. And when you see me perform, is they've got these incredible stances. Why? And I think in the Western world, people, no, you know, us the Westerners, the Chinese are naturally flexible, so it's okay, acceptable for us to do a high stance. That's ridiculous. I see so many martial artists, and I think, no, you guys haven't even dedicated enough time to your stance. In China, the reason they can do these stances is because,
Spend all the time, do you?
yeah, they rather than sit, they'll be squatting, eating. They'll be squatting, going to the loo. They'll be squatting, playing cards. So naturally, they're able to do these things, which then when a key stance in Shaolin is pubu, which is kind of called a crouching stance, where you have one leg out and this leg is pretty much squat, but both feet flat. Every Westerner that I've met has trouble with this stance. And I think that having that, especially when you get the Chinese come over to these countries and see that, and they see these masters and whatnot, I think they get almost offended by it, and I think it causes a culture clash where they won't accept who we are and we won't accept who they are. I think there has to be a real balance between the two. I think Bruce Lee had that, and that's where, although he weren't doing stuff as great as the Shaolin monks, he had that balance, and and it was language, obviously, and his philosophy was so powerful that he broke in, and it was just wonderful.
We've touched on the training side of things. I just want to go into that a little bit further. Now, when you first started, obviously the train's very hard. It's up 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and you go through various different stages, and you could be training 6, 7, 8 hours a day. Did you find it difficult to start off with the muscles and so forth? And you would have a specialty too. So what are some of the grueling techniques that you, first of all, probably didn't like, but then learned to respect them and appreciate them?
I think, yeah, some of the training is extremely difficult and different approach to training. You know, waking up at 5 and running up a mountain, which is not, people often picture, oh, you got these stairs that you run. No, it's just literally a mountain. So climbing up the mountain and things like that, and then you're crawling back down and you're doing headstands on concrete for hours on end. And what really pushed me, although I realized I had the ego at that point, was the ego, because I had 6-year-old children. I thought I was good, and I had kids at 6 just whooping my ass on everything. You know, they'll be in a headstand like that on concrete, no problem. I'll be there kind of with tears coming out of my eyes, and I thought, how on earth did I think I was good? And I come out here and this is the standard, you know, it really pushed.
But the strength to continue on, you had nowhere to go. So really, how are you going to escape that? So you really got to apply yourself. We think.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, you know, there was no turning back. You know, my parents said, you know, if it's too much or this or that, you know, you can always come back. And I was like, I'm not going to come back because I've got whooped by a 6-year-old kid. That just taught me, instantly it taught me that.
But it's great to have an ego to do that though, isn't it?
It is good to have that ego, exactly. But I mean, in the first place, it was. But in the first place, that ego didn't need to be there. But that means that I should have started training as a youngster. And I think that that's what I do. A lot of people say to me, I'm here in the UK, and they say, okay, you train mostly kids, don't you? I say, no, I don't train mostly kids. I said, these kids, like you, was once a kid, and they'll be older. Then I'll have my adult students. Then they'll have kid students. I can't just start with an adult because you've already missed the fundamentals of the training. It's like trying to build an upstairs to a house without having the downstairs. It's impossible. You have to, you have to build it up.
I suppose there's going to be a lot of adults who are going to see you in the show and see what you do and want to do that.
And they want to do it.
Yeah. So the idea is they start young, but what I was fascinated by is I've seen a lot of kids train and seen your kids train, how focused they were, how disciplined, and how the technique was such a high level. What do you do to get that out of them? You know, what to keep them positive, not to be distracted in other things. That focus is amazing. How do you do it?
Well, I think first of all, you know, I give them an objective, you know, and for me, this is nothing to do with money. Although I'm making good money, and I think that that's always a good goal to have, you know.
Well, you got to look after your family.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, you don't. If you do what you love to do, and you're great and you're special, then money will come to you, and that's what I found. So I teach them that philosophy, and I also, obviously, they love doing shows. Everyone loves to get on stage and have that sensation. It's just such a buzz. Even the most unconfident person, if you put them on stage and they say something funny and everyone laughs, it gives them a boost. That's a humane thing right there. So for these kids, I was doing shows with the Shaolin monks, and the only reason I stopped is because I got married and had a baby. So my decision was to pass down the wisdom that I had and was lucky enough to get from Shaolin to these young boys. So I've kind of shown them that, and we have a saying that pain is glory. So the idea is almost like a baby. A baby can't walk, and it stands up and falls down, stands up, and that's painful. But by doing that all the time, going through that pain, when my son's now running around, walking around, he walks around with glory because he's realized the pain. So it's the same with them. They're doing backflips on their head. I've got all of them doing it, backflips on their head, which in this country is unheard of. We are the only group of
I've never seen it outside of China.
Yeah, exactly, you know, and I've given it to them because they understand they do it enough, they become strong enough, and they can do it on concrete, they can do it anywhere, and it doesn't even hurt them now. But the glory they get from knowing that they're the only ones. And I've told them, and I've shown my brother-in-law, who is also 10, he's about to go on tour to America. He lives in Shaolin Temple. He's a Shaolin monk, so to speak, and we do kind of a Skype with him, and the level is almost the same. So rather than compete with some English students, which wouldn't give them motivation, because to be honest, not to be disrespectful, at this present time, there's no one who can compete with them. So that is a downer, because that gives them the ego. But what I do is I don't let them compete with the English students. I let them compete with the Chinese students. So I'm getting raw footage from China and saying, look what this guy is doing. You know, if you want to go over to China, you have to be able to do this. And I mean, I can do a finger handstand, which I was the only person in the UK who could do that, non-Chinese. And one of my students, Victor, who's 10 years old, training for 3 years, he can already do this. So by the time he's 15, he's going to be doing 1. And in China, there's only 2 people that can do this.
And you're leading the way.
Yeah,
So-
Well, definitely, I'm leading the way, and I think it's from a good approach. None of my students at present call me Shifu. I'm very young, and I don't think I deserve. Definitely in China, I was never called Shifu, so there's no reason why in this country I should be called a Shifu. And my name is Matthew. If they call me by a Chinese name, they call me Jiao Lian, which means coach. And I think that's a very important part of
It's a humble way of looking at it, isn't it?
It is a humble way, but it's also the
Respect
right
there anyway.
way, the right way for them to learn, because they look at me more of a brother. So there's a brother relationship where I can show them anything. Whereas when you have the Shifu relationship, they feel that they come into my gym and they have to bow and they have to have that fear of me. And most of the time what I find is when students bow to their Shifu, they have the fear like that, but then to speak out and whatnot, they don't. And I see a lot of students with disrespect, whereas my students, they can come into my gym and be like, hey Matt, how's it going? But when I say stand up, they stand up. And I think that's something I learned from China as well. There's not many Shifus in China. Where I learned, I wasn't learning with a Shifu, I was learning with a Jiao Lian, with a coach. When they, we can chill together and play cards, but when he says it's training time, stand up straight, they say Xiao Xi Li Zhou. Your whole class is bang, boom, 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 everyone's lined up and ready to go. And I think that I experienced that firsthand, and that's what I'm giving to these guys.
Fantastic.
And that's why they're doing so well.
Now, we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you, there's 300 or so forms in Shaolin, there's 18 or so weapons.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
I've studied an awful lot of Shaolin weapons and things like that.
In your stage show, they really want you just to do one or the other.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Or
So
a couple of them, yeah.
Whilst I was in Wheel of Life, I was doing a few things. I was doing the 3-section stuff, or the chain whips, the double chain whips. Those were my 2 weapons. And then fist form, I was doing a tiger form and sometimes a traditional Paltren form. So those were my 2 forms, fist and weapons. And then my qigong would either be breaking the iron bar or the finger handstand.
The chain whip and how you bump your ground. I've watched it, looked at the guys, but no one's been able to explain to me how you get that rhythm and so forth. But Matthew, thank you for being on the show.
No problem.
Really
It's a
appreciate it, and we're looking forward to see more of the Shaolin in the UK. Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.